I never thought my mother-in-law would be the one to destroy everything I'd worked for, but looking back, I should have seen it coming. My name is Harper, and until last Tuesday, I ran a successful home bakery business that was finally starting to take off. Now, well, let's just say I'm still trying to figure out how everything went so wrong so fast. The call came at 7:43 a.m., right as I was finishing the last touches on a massive corporate order for Wilkins Industries. Mr. Wilkins himself was on the line, and his voice could have cut glass. "These pastries are inedible," he spat. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I have 50 executives from across the country sitting in my conference room. And every single one of them just bit into what tastes like salt bombs disguised as croissants." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I said, gripping my phone tighter. "I tested every batch myself last night." "Well, clearly you didn't. This is absolutely unacceptable. I've already had 3 people complain of feeling ill. Consider your payment cancelled, and trust me, you'll be hearing from our legal department." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar scent of vanilla and butter, trying to make sense of what just happened. These were my signature chocolate almond croissants, the same ones that had earned me a waiting list 3 months long. I'd been baking them for years. I rushed to my storage containers where I kept the backup samples from every order. With shaking hands, I broke one open and took a bite. The moment it hit my tongue, I knew something was terribly wrong. Instead of the delicate balance of sweet and buttery I'd perfected, I tasted nothing but salt, enough to make my eyes water. "No, no, no," I whispered, breaking open another one. Same thing. My mind raced back to the previous evening. I'd finished the entire order around midnight, packed everything carefully, and left it ready for morning delivery. The only person who had access to my kitchen between then and the 6 a.m. pickup was Harper. "Is everything all right?" I thought I heard voices. Lorraine stood in my kitchen doorway, still in her silk robe, looking concerned. My mother-in-law had been staying with us for the past week, claiming she needed a break from her empty house. She'd spent most of that time hovering around my kitchen, offering unwanted advice about how I should be running my business more professionally. "The Wilkins order," I said, my voice barely steady. "Someone tampered with it." "Oh, dear." She pressed a manicured hand to her chest. "What do you mean?" "The salt content is completely wrong. These are inedible. Someone deliberately sabotaged them after I went to bed." Lorraine's expression shifted slightly, so slightly I almost missed it. A tiny flicker of something crossed her face before concern took over again. "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? You were working quite late, after all. Everyone slips up sometimes, especially when they're tired." "I don't make mistakes like this," I said firmly. "Not with recipes I've made hundreds of times." She sighed, that familiar disappointed sound I'd heard so many times before. "Well, darling, maybe this is a sign. I've been telling Ethan for months that this little hobby of yours is taking up too much of your time. Perhaps it's time to focus on more important things, like starting a family." The way she said it, so smooth, so reasonable, made my blood run cold. Because in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that she had done this. But as I stood there, watching her perfectly composed face, I realized something else. I had no way to prove it. "I need you to leave my kitchen," I said quietly. "Harper, dear, I'm only trying to help. Get out." She left, but not before I caught the smallest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As I listened to her footsteps fade away, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. Because one thing was crystal clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next 3 days fielding angry calls and emails, watching my reputation crumble one cancellation at a time. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of my dreams. But the worst part wasn't the lost business, it was trying to explain it all to Ethan. "Honey, I know you're upset," he said, pacing our living room that evening. "But accusing Mom of sabotage? That's a pretty serious claim." I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through another 1-star review on my business page. Who else could it have been, Ethan? She was the only one here. Maybe there was a mix-up with the ingredients. Or... Stop. I put down my phone. Just stop making excuses for her. You didn't see her face when I confronted her. She practically admitted it without saying the words. From the kitchen, I heard the soft clink of china, Lorraine making her evening tea. She'd refused to leave, insisting she needed to support us through this difficult time. The sound of her humming drifted through the house. So casual, so normal, it made my skin crawl. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. "Girl, what is going on? Just saw the Wilkins review. Call me ASAP. I need some air," I told Ethan, grabbing my keys. He reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Don't. Just. Don't." I drove to the coffee shop where Jenna and I always met during culinary school. She was already there, 2 lattes waiting on the table. One look at her face told me she understood exactly how bad things were. "Okay, spill," she said as I sat down. "And don't leave anything out." I told her everything: the sabotaged order, Lorraine's reaction, Ethan's denial. By the time I finished, my latte was cold and Jenna's expression had hardened. "You need to get cameras in that kitchen," she said firmly. "Like, yesterday." "I already ordered some," I admitted. "But it feels weird, setting up surveillance in my own home." "Honey, what's weird is having a mother-in-law who'd rather destroy your business than see you succeed." Jenna leaned forward. "Why do you think she's really doing this?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with Ethan's face. I declined the call, but the text that followed made my heart stop. "Mom found your backup samples in the trash. She's upset you're collecting evidence against her. Please come home so we can talk about this." "Oh God," I whispered, showing Jenna the message. "That manipulative by..." Jenna caught herself. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're staying at my place tonight. Give everyone some space to cool down." But when I got home to pack a bag, Lorraine was waiting in my bedroom, sitting primly on my bed like she owned the space. "Harper, dear," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "I think we need to have a heart-to-heart about what's best for this family." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, grabbing my overnight bag from the closet. "You're right, there isn't." Her tone changed, steel beneath the silk. "Because this little baking fantasy of yours is over. Ethan needs a real partner, not someone playing at being a businesswoman in her kitchen." I turned to face her, finally seeing the truth of who she was. "You really think you've won, don't you?" She stood, smoothing her perfectly pressed slacks. "I think you need to decide what's more important, your silly little cakes or your marriage. Because, dear," she paused at the door, "I've known my son his entire life. Who do you think he'll believe in the end?" As she left, I heard Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. My hands shook as I finished packing, but my mind was clear for the first time in days. Lorraine had just made a crucial mistake: she'd shown her hand too early. I pulled out my phone and played back the recording I'd started when I entered the room. Her words, crystal clear, would be impossible to explain away as a misunderstanding. But as I listened to her threat again, a new worry gnawed at my gut. Maybe she was right about one thing: who would Ethan believe? I spent 3 days at Jenna's place, ignoring Ethan's calls and trying to figure out my next move. On the 4th morning, while Jenna was at work, I went back home to grab more clothes. The house was quiet, Ethan at work, Lorraine presumably out somewhere plotting my downfall. Perfect. As I packed more clothes, something caught my eye: Ethan's old chest in the corner of our closet. He kept childhood mementos there, things from before we met. I'd never looked through it, never felt the need to. But now. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Photo albums, school awards, and beneath them all, a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. The top one was dated just months before our wedding. "My dearest Ethan," I read aloud, Lorraine's flowing script filling the page. "I'm writing this because I can't bear to see you make the same mistake I did. Marriage isn't about passion or dreams, it's about stability. Your father abandoned us to chase his ambitions, and now I see Harper heading down that same selfish path." The letter slipped from my fingers. There were dozens more, each one a carefully crafted manipulation. Warnings about me, subtle digs at my career choice, reminders of how she sacrificed everything for Ethan. "What are you doing?" I jumped. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I found your mother's letters," I said, holding one up. "Did you know she's been plotting against me since before we got married?" He stepped forward, reaching for the letters, but I moved them away. "Those are private." "Private?" Like how she privately destroyed my business. Or how she privately threatened me in our bedroom. "Harper. No, you need to read these." I thrust a letter at him. "Your mother isn't who you think she is. She's been manipulating you, playing on your guilt about your father." "Stop." His voice cracked. "Just stop." "Why?" "Because it's easier to pretend everything's fine. To let her destroy our marriage while you play peacekeeper." The front door opened downstairs. Lorraine's voice floated up, "Ethan. Is that you home early?" I grabbed my phone, ready to play the recording of her threat, but Ethan's next words stopped me cold. "I know what she did." I stared at him. "What?" "The Wilkins order. I saw her in the kitchen that night. I woke up and went to get water, and she was there, measuring salt into your containers. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I convinced myself I was seeing things that my mother couldn't. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "You knew. This whole time, you knew." I didn't want to believe it, he whispered. "She's my mother, Harper. The only family I have left. And what am I?" My voice was barely audible. "What have I been to you all these years?" Footsteps on the stairs. Lorraine appeared behind Ethan, taking in the scene, the open chest, the scattered letters, my tear-streaked face. "What's going on here?" she asked, but her eyes narrowed at the letters in my hand. "Tell her, Ethan," I said. "Tell her what you saw that night." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched my husband, the man I thought would always have my back, struggle to find his voice. But before he could speak, Lorraine stepped forward, her mask finally slipping. "Of course he won't tell me anything," she said, her voice cold. "Because he knows what's best for this family. Don't you, darling?" I looked between them, mother and son, bound by years of manipulation and guilt. In that moment, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about my bakery anymore. This was about breaking free. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the recording from my bedroom confrontation with Lorraine. Her threats filled the room, crystal clear and undeniable. Ethan's face went pale. "Now," I said, stopping the recording, "we're all going to have a very honest conversation about the future of this family." 2 weeks after the confrontation, I sat in Jenna's studio apartment, staring at my laptop screen. My finger hovered over the upload button, next to a video titled, "Starting Over, A Baker's Journey." "Just do it already," Jenna said, peering over my shoulder. "You've res-hot it 4 times. It's perfect." Perfect wasn't the word I'd use. After Ethan's confession about seeing his mother sabotage my business, I'd moved in with Jenna temporarily. Taking space, we called it. The video was my first step toward rebuilding, not just my business, but myself. I clicked upload. There, Jenna grinned. Now we celebrate. She pulled out a bottle of wine, but before she could open it, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan, "Mom's in the hospital. Heart problems. She's asking for you." "Don't you dare," Jenna said, reading my expression. This is exactly the kind of manipulation she's known for. I showed her the text. What if it's real? Then let Ethan handle it. You need to focus on. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at my laptop. Harper, look. My video, uploaded barely 5 minutes ago, already had hundreds of views. Comments were pouring in. Isn't this the baker from the Wilkins disaster? Wait until you hear what really happened. My sister worked that event. The food wasn't just bad, people got sick. My hands started shaking. I didn't know anyone got sick. Because they didn't, a familiar voice said from the doorway. Mr. Wilkins himself stood there, looking uncomfortable in Jenna's bohemian apartment building hallway. May I come in? Jenna let him in, shooting me a worried look. Mr. Wilkins cleared his throat. Mrs. Anderson visited my office last week, he said. She had quite an interesting story about how you've been harassing her, blaming her for your own mistakes. She showed me texts, emails. Those are fake, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. I know. He pulled out his phone. Because I had my team look into the food poisoning claims. They were all posted from the same IP address, traced back to your mother-in-law's home computer. My mind raced. While I'd been hiding out, starting over, Lorraine had been methodically destroying what was left of my reputation. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I don't like being used as a weapon in someone else's war. He handed me a business card. My daughter's getting married next month. She loved your work before. All this. Fix your reputation, and the job is yours. After he left, Jenna and I sat in stunned silence until my phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification. My video had just hit 1,000 views. But it was the newest comment that made my blood run cold. Isn't this the same Harper Lawson who lost her catering license last year? Check the state records. I never lost my license, I whispered. I never. Jenna was already typing furiously on her laptop. She didn't just fake reviews, she said finally. Harper, she's been systematically filing complaints against you with the state board. Using different names, different incidents. There's a pattern going back months before the Wilkins event. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just about one ruined event or family control. Lorraine had been playing a longer game, laying groundwork for my destruction long before I even knew I was under attack. My phone buzzed one more time. Ethan again, she's asking for you. Please come. I need to tell you something important. I looked at Jenna, then at my laptop where comments were still pouring in. The choice crystallized in my mind. I could keep running, or I could face this head-on. I'm going to the hospital, I said, grabbing my keys. Harper, wait. No. I turned to her. I need to know how deep this goes. And if she's really sick. Well, that's the perfect time for people to tell the truth, isn't it? As I headed for my car, I pulled up the state licensing board's number. It was time to start fighting back, and I knew exactly where to begin. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and lies. I found Ethan outside his mother's room, his face drawn with exhaustion. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Relief? Fear? I couldn't tell anymore. Before we go in, he said, pulling me aside, there's something you need to know. The doctors. They can't find anything wrong with her. Of course they couldn't. I almost laughed. But that's not all, he continued. I found something on her computer. She's been planning this for months, the complaints, the reviews, everything. There are spreadsheets, Harper. Detailed plans dating back to before our wedding. My throat tightened. Why tell me this now? Because she doesn't know I found them. And. He hesitated. Jenna called. She wants you on her show next week. Mom's been watching your videos, she knows about the opportunity. I think this hospital visit is her way of stopping you. Before I could respond, Lorraine's voice drifted from the room. Ethan. Is that Harper I hear? We entered to find her propped up in bed, looking frail but somehow still perfectly put together. Her eyes locked onto mine with the intensity of a predator. Oh, sweetheart, she said, reaching for my hand. I'm so glad you came. I've been watching your little cooking videos. They're cute. I kept my distance. Mr. Wilkins visited me today. Her hand dropped slightly, but her smile never wavered. Did he? How nice. I hope he wasn't too harsh about those unfortunate food poisoning incidents. The ones you fabricated from your home computer. The monitor beside her bed beeped slightly faster. I don't know what you're talking about. Ethan, darling, can you get me some water? No, Ethan said quietly. I think I need to hear this. Lorraine's facade cracked, just for a moment. I was only trying to protect our family. Harper's little bakery dream was tearing us apart. Surely you can see that. The only thing tearing us apart is you, I said, pulling out my phone. I spoke to the licensing board today. They're investigating all those complaints you filed. And guess what? They're very interested in the pattern they found. She sat up straighter, her theatrical fragility forgotten. You wouldn't dare pursue this. Think about what it would do to Ethan, having his mother investigated for fraud. I already am, Ethan cut in. I filed the initial report myself. The silence that followed was deafening. Lorraine stared at her son like she'd never seen him before. I'm doing the show with Jenna next week, I said into the quiet. You can't stop that. But what happens next is up to you. Is it? Her voice had turned cold. You think one little cooking show appearance will fix everything? I still have copies of every email, every review. One click, and what? I stepped closer to her bed. You'll prove how far you'll go to destroy your son's happiness. Because that's what you're doing. It's not about me anymore, it's about him watching his mother choose destruction over love. The monitor's beeping increased again, but this time I knew it wasn't from any real medical condition. It was the sound of control slipping away. Ethan, she whispered, you can't let her do this to me. But Ethan moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. You did this to yourself, Mom. And it stops now. As we turned to leave, Lorraine called out, if you walk out that door, don't expect to ever come back. We kept walking, but in the hallway, Ethan's hand trembled in mine. The weight of what he'd just done hung heavy between us. My phone buzzed, Jenna, confirming the show details. 1 week to prepare, to prove myself on national television. 1 week to rise from the ashes or crash and burn completely. Are you sure about this? I asked Ethan. He squeezed my hand. No. But I'm sure about you. Behind us, we could hear Lorraine calling for a nurse, her voice rising with manufactured hysteria. But for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid of what she might do next. I was ready. The studio lights felt like an interrogation lamp as I arranged my ingredients on the counter. Jenna's show, Sweet Success, would go live in 30 minutes, and everything had to be perfect. My signature chocolate almond croissants, the same ones Lorraine had sabotaged, would be my redemption piece. 10 minutes to mic check, a production assistant called out. I reached for my pre-measured flour but froze. The texture was wrong. I pinched some between my fingers, tasted it. Salt. My heart stopped. No, I whispered, checking the other ingredients. Sugar replaced with salt, baking powder with soda, even the chocolate had been tampered with. No, no, no. Harper. Jenna rushed over, her TV makeup perfect but her eyes worried. What's wrong? Someone's been in my ingredients. My voice sounded distant, underwater. They're all ruined. Security footage would later show Lorraine entering the studio early that morning, dressed as part of the cleaning crew. But in that moment, all I knew was that she'd found a way to destroy me one last time. 5 minutes to air. We can't stop the show, Jenna said, gripping my arm. It's live. Half the local networks are carrying this. I can't. My chest tightened. I can't do this. Not again. Yes, you can. Ethan appeared beside me, carrying a box. Mom may have ruined your ingredients, but she doesn't know about these. He opened the box to reveal pristine ingredients, flour, sugar, chocolate, everything I needed. I had a feeling she might try something. These came straight from the store to my car to hear. Relief flooded through me, until I saw the time. 2 minutes. Even with fresh ingredients, the croissants took hours to make properly. Change of plans, Jenna announced. Harper, remember that chocolate soufflé you made in culinary school? The one that won the speed challenge? I nodded slowly. That's your new recipe. 20 minutes, start to finish. Live TV. Show everyone what you can really do under pressure. 30 seconds. As I frantically reorganized my station, movement in the studio audience caught my eye. Lorraine sat in the front row, wearing her best church smile. Beside her was Mr. Wilkins. She must have invited him to witness my failure. Live in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Jenna launched into her intro, but I barely heard it. My hands shook as I reached for the first ingredient. Today we have Harper Lawson, showing us her famous chocolate soufflé. Famous? I'd never made this recipe professionally. But as I cracked the first egg, muscle memory took over. Years of practice, of loving this craft, guided my movements. Then I saw Lorraine pull out her phone, typing something. Seconds later, my own phone buzzed on the counter. A message appeared, check your licensing status. My hand slipped. Egg yolk splattered across the counter. Having trouble. Lorraine called out sweetly from the audience. Maybe professional baking isn't for everyone. The studio went quiet. This wasn't part of the show format, audience members weren't supposed to speak. But Lorraine had never cared about rules that didn't serve her purpose. I looked at the mess on my counter, at the cameras capturing every second of my humiliation, at Lorraine's triumphant smile. In that moment, I understood something. This was exactly what she wanted. My public failure would be her greatest victory. Actually, I heard myself say, I'm going to make something else. Jenna's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. A last-minute change. How exciting. I pulled out a mixing bowl, my movements deliberate now. Today, I'm going to show you how to recover when someone deliberately sabotages your ingredients. Because that's what real baking is about, not just following recipes, but understanding how to fix what's broken. Lorraine's smile faltered as I held up the salt-filled flour bag. Let's start by talking about what happens when someone replaces your ingredients with salt. Again. The audience gasped. Cameras swung toward Lorraine. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly in control. You see, I continued, the interesting thing about sabotage is that it leaves evidence. Just like security footage. Jenna's producer was already signaling frantically, queuing up the morning security tape. Game on, Lorraine. The security footage played on the studio's giant screens, showing Lorraine in a cleaner's uniform, methodically replacing my ingredients. The audience gasped. Mr. Wilkins stood up, his face darkening with recognition. But I kept baking, my hands steady now as I separated eggs and measured chocolate. You see, I continued, my voice carrying through the silent studio, baking isn't just about following recipes. It's about understanding why things work, or don't work. Lorraine rose from her seat. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and. Security footage from the Wilkins event, Jenna cut in smoothly, signaling her producer. The screen split, showing a second video, Lorraine in my kitchen months ago, performing the same sabotage. That's private property. Lorraine's voice cracked. You had no right to. Actually, Mr. Wilkins spoke up, as the injured party in that event, I authorized the release of all security footage. He turned to face her. Including the footage of you filing false complaints with the licensing board using my company's name. I folded chocolate into my batter, each movement precise. When someone replaces sugar with salt, there's always a trace left behind. Just like when someone leaves a trail of fake reviews from the same IP address. Lorraine lunged for my workstation, but Ethan caught her arm. That's enough, Mom. Enough? I did this for you. She wrenched away from him. She was taking you away from me, just like your father. No. Ethan's voice was firm. Dad left because of you. Because you couldn't stand seeing anyone else succeed. The studio was dead silent except for the soft sound of my whisk against the bowl. I poured the batter into ramekins, remembering every failed batch, every cruel comment, every moment of doubt. You want to know the interesting thing about soufflés? I said, sliding them into the oven. They're incredibly delicate. One wrong move and they collapse. But with the right support. I glanced at Ethan, at Jenna, at Mr. Wilkins. They rise above everything. This is all very theatrical, Lorraine sneered, but her voice trembled. But you've forgotten something, dear. I still have copies of every complaint, every review. One click in. And what? I turned to face her fully. You'll prove to everyone watching that you're exactly who we say you are. Go ahead. I'm done being afraid of you. She pulled out her phone, fingers shaking. I'll destroy everything you've built. No, Mom, Ethan said quietly. You'll destroy the last chance you had with your family. The timer dinged. I opened the oven and pulled out perfect chocolate soufflés, rising proud and tall above their ramekins. The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Mr. Wilkins, I said, placing one in front of him. I believe I owe you a proper dessert. He took a bite and smiled. My daughter's wedding is next month. I trust you're still available. She most certainly is, Jenna beamed. In fact, after today's show, I'd say Harper's going to be very busy. Lorraine made one last desperate move, reaching for the remaining soufflés. But as she did, her phone clattered to the floor, screen lighting up with her draft folder full of fake reviews and complaints. A production assistant picked it up, automatically displaying the contents on the studio's screens. The evidence of her manipulation played out in front of hundreds of thousands of viewers. Her carefully crafted facade crumbled like overworked pastry. You see, Mother, Ethan said, his voice heavy with finality, the thing about karma is that it's a lot like baking. Everything you put in eventually comes back out. As security led Lorraine away, still protesting, I felt no triumph. Instead, I felt something unexpected, pity. She'd spent so long trying to control everything that she'd lost what mattered most. I turned back to my workstation, where one perfect soufflé remained. Sometimes, I said to the cameras, to the audience, to everyone who'd ever doubted themselves, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply rising above it. The soufflé stood tall, unshaken, just like me. 6 months after the show aired, I stood in my new commercial kitchen, surrounded by the sweet scent of vanilla and possibility. The video of Lorraine's exposure had gone viral, but that wasn't what changed everything. It was what happened after. My phone buzzed, another order notification. Since the show, my business had exploded. Mr. Wilkins' daughter's wedding had been just the beginning. Now I had a waiting list 3 months long and was preparing to open my first storefront bakery. Special delivery, Ethan called, walking in with the mail. This one's from the state board. I wiped my hands on my apron, taking the official-looking envelope. Inside was my formally reinstated license, along with a letter apologizing for the unfortunate incident with the false complaints. There's something else, Ethan said quietly, holding out another envelope. I recognized Lorraine's handwriting immediately. I don't know if I want to read it. I already did, he admitted. I think you should. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 30 years ago, a young Lorraine standing proudly in front of a small cafe. The headline read, "Local Baker's Dreams Crushed as Bank Denies Loan." Below it, she'd written, "I told myself I was protecting you both. The truth is, I couldn't bear to see someone else succeed where I had failed." The bitterness became my secret ingredient, poisoning everything I touched. I'm starting therapy next week. Too late for us, perhaps, but maybe not too late for me. I set the letter down, feelings I couldn't name swirling inside me. Have you talked to her? Not yet. Ethan focused on arranging some mixing bowls. Maybe someday. But right now, this is our time. The bell above the kitchen door chimed. Jenna burst in, camera crew in tow. Ready for your segment. Sweet success, where are they now, is going to be huge. Almost, I said, pulling a tray from the oven. Just finishing something. They were chocolate almond croissants, the same recipe Lorraine had tried to destroy. But I'd made some changes. A touch more salt to enhance the sweetness, a hint of bitterness in the chocolate to make the almond shine brighter. These are different, Jenna said, taking a bite. Better, even. What changed? I thought about Lorraine's letter, about bitter ingredients and sweet results. Sometimes the things that try to break us end up making us stronger. You just have to know how to use them. The camera crew set up as I worked, capturing my hands shaping dough, adding fillings, creating something new. My phone buzzed again, another order, this time from a familiar address. Lorraine's neighborhood. It's from her neighbor, Ethan explained quickly. Mom's hosting a therapy group. They want your croissants. I looked at the order, then at the batch I'd just finished. The same recipe, transformed by understanding both its bitter and sweet elements. Before I could second-guess myself, I added a note to the order, recipe adapted from lessons learned. Harper. You're a better person than she deserved, Ethan said softly. No, I replied, sliding another tray into the oven. I'm just finally the person I was meant to be. The camera red light blinked on. Jenna stepped forward, ready to interview me about my success story. But as I stood there in my kitchen, my real, professional kitchen, I realized this wasn't just about success or revenge or even redemption. It was about rising above the heat, about taking what could have burned you and using it to create something better. Just like every perfect soufflé I'd ever made. So, Harper, Jenna began, tell us how it feels to have your dreams come true. I smiled, picking up my rolling pin. Let me show you instead. Because in the end, that's what baking is all about, not just following recipes, but understanding how to transform raw ingredients, even the bitter ones, into something beautiful. Something sweet. Something that rises above it all. The timer dinged, and I opened the oven to perfect croissants, golden and flaky, carrying both bitter and sweet within their layers. Just like me.